Hello and welcome to Philosophy Vibe, the website where we discuss and debate different philosophical ideas. Today we're going to be looking at our knowledge of the external world. This is the philosophy of perception, how we view the world and what we can know beyond our own eyes. Philosophers have been fascinated by the fact that our human perception relies on our mind. What we see is what our minds let us see. From this, many theories have emerged questioning what and how our minds perceive the external reality. I will be running through three very popular theories to do with our human perception of the world, and John and I will be critically assessing them. The first one we should be looking at is commonly known as Direct Realism. This is the idea that we as humans directly perceive the world as it is. Whatever we perceive in our minds is exactly the external world that exists. We have immediate awareness and understanding of the external world, and there is no difference between what exists external to the mind and what the mind perceives. So, what do you think of this? Would you consider yourself a direct realist? Do you think we have direct perception of the world?
Well, no. Direct realism is often referred to as naive realism, as in, you must be pretty naive to believe this. Most people will go through life believing what they immediately perceive is the exact representation of the external world outside of their minds. However, as David Hume said, just a little philosophical investigation would lead someone to drop this theory.
Okay, explain why.
Firstly, science has proven that an object our minds perceive is not what it looks like in the external world. Let's use the example of colour. We are looking at this box and seeing the colour green. Our minds are telling us that this box is coloured green. However, outside of our minds, this box is not in fact coloured green. I only perceive the colour because the box is made of certain particles, and when light hits the box and reflects off the box into my eye, it generates the perception of the colour green. However, greenness is not part of the actual box, it's just a perception in my mind.
I see.
Also, different objects appear to have different colours at different times or at different angles. If I put the box under a microscope, I may see it as a different colour green. So, what is the correct colour? We also see that objects look different at different angles or at different distances. The building down the road looks very big up close, but very small when I'm far away. If the direct realist claims that we perceive the world directly as it is, then what size is the building? How big should it look? What is the correct size I should perceive it as?
Yes, I understand.
Also, how would it account for hallucinations and delusions? If I put a stick in a pool of water, the stick looks bent. I know this is just an illusion, and if I take the stick out of the pool, it is in fact straight. However, as I am looking at this illusion of a bent stick, the direct realist is committed to the idea that I am perceiving the world directly. So, would they argue the stick is bent? Any illusion or hallucination would mean the direct realist would have to claim that this is actually part of an external world and not just in my mind.
Okay, we may be able to escape some of these problems if we follow the indirect realist theory or take a representationalist approach.
What's that?
Indirect realism is the idea that there is an external world beyond our mind. However, we do not perceive this directly. We in fact perceive this indirectly. There is an intermediate between the external world and our mind. This is referred to as sense data. The sense data can be considered a mental image of an object. It reflects off the external world and projects onto our minds. It is as though we have pictures in our mind that represent the outside world. So, when I look at this broccoli, I am actually perceiving the sense data of the physical broccoli that is creating in me the various sensations of colour and texture, taste and smell. It is these qualities, these senses, that are referred to as secondary qualities and have been widely developed by the philosopher John Locke. This theory therefore fits with our scientific discoveries. As you mentioned, the colour example, the external objects do not have the colour, but certain intermediate processes project the colour onto our minds. Also, it deals with the problems of hallucinations and delusions, as we can argue that the sense data we are perceiving does not match up with the external world, giving rise to something that is not actually there or is not being perceived correctly. Therefore, There is an external world that we perceive, but we do not perceive it directly. We only directly perceive the sense data, which gives us the full picture that we have in our minds.
Again, I'm not satisfied with this theory.
Why?
Well, the indirect realist says we never perceive the world directly. So then how can we ever be sure that what we are perceiving is correct and is not an illusion or hallucination? Indirect realism seems to have thrown a veil of perception over our eyes, saying we can never perceive the world as it truly is. If this is the case, how can we ever know for sure that what we are perceiving is what is actually there?
Right, okay.
Also, how can we ever be sure that all people are perceiving the same thing or have the same sense data experience? If we have an external object which gives rise to the sense data projection on my mind, how do we know this gives the same projections on all minds? Reality then seems to be wholly subjective, with the possibility that each mind perceives the external world in a different way.
Yes, I see.
And also, if we only perceive the sense data, we never come in direct contact with the external world. So how can we be sure it actually exists? Ultimately, it's just our ideas that we perceive, the projections on our minds. Why then should we assume there is a physical world that is creating the ideas, rather than take the approach that reality is just a set of mental ideas with no external world?
Okay, great point. That leads us on to the next theory, idealism.
What is idealism?
Idealism is a theory put forward by the philosopher George Berkeley. It argues that there is no external world. Rather, reality is just a series of mental ideas. It is the rejection of matter. There is no mind-independent reality. Rather, everything is dependent on the mind to exist. All the objects we see, everything that exists, is just ideas in our mind. There is no physical world outside of our minds. Something only exists if there is a mind there to perceive it. Nothing exists outside the mind.
Whoa, that's quite a radical theory.
Yes, but it's the evolution of indirect realism. Where indirect realism claims an external world exists, but we only perceive it indirectly, it then claims we only directly perceive our ideas or our sense data. Idealism then has good grounds to reject the external world. Firstly, as you said, how, if we only directly perceive sense data, do we have any basis to assume an external world exists? If we can never directly perceive matter, but we only perceive it through this veil of perception, how can we say that it definitely exists? All we can be sure of is that our ideas exist. All we can be sure of is that we perceive our ideas. Beyond that, we are not in any position to argue for an external world.
But there are still a lot of problems with idealism.
What?
Well, I can see the logic in rejecting a material world, but how does idealism count for such continuity? If there is no external world outside my mind, how is it that the same room I walk in every day looks exactly the same? If there is no material world causing my ideas, what keeps my reality in such regularity, such pattern? Purely mental ideas would not need such continuity and regularity.
Yeah.
Also, how does it account for gaps in our experience? If I leave a candle burning and come back hours later, the wax has melted and the flame is smaller. If there is not a physical material candle, how does this continuity persist without my perception of it?
Yes, good point.
Also, idealism runs the risk of falling into solipsism. If I claim that everything is just a mental idea, it would lead me down the slippery slope of agreeing that all people I experience are just mental ideas and are not real, that I'm the only mind that actually exists.
I see. Well, that's all the time we have for now. Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed the vibe, and we will be expanding on indirect realism and idealism in our John Locke and George Berkeley videos. So visit the website and make sure you check them out.